For you when you changed formation and the two goals came very quickly?
Yeah, but Tottenham, it's the history of the Tottenham. They always created many chances and scored so much, but at the end they miss always something to arrive at the end. We believe in the history, I think.
The word Spursy sounds like it should have come from Arsenal. It sounds like something invented in a pub by people in red shirts, waiting for Tottenham to fall over again. But that's not really where it came from. By most accounts, Spursy was coined by Tottenham fans themselves on a Spurs forum in 2013. Not as a chant from the outside, not as an insult thrown over the wall, more like a diagnosis from inside the house. And that's the thing that makes it so strange, because if your enemies call you fragile, you can push back. If your rivals say you're cursed, you can laugh it off. But if your own fans invent the word, if your own fans give the feeling a name, then it starts to become something else. It becomes shorthand, it becomes a nervous joke, it becomes the thing you say at 2-0 up when everyone else is celebrating and you can already feel the floor moving. Tottenham didn't just lose games, every club loses games. Tottenham found a word for a very specific kind of losing from a position of strength, losing when the door was open, losing when it seemed, for once, that the story might change. The curse starts as a joke when supporters give pain a name, and once that name exists, it does a weird kind of work. It tidies up history, it gathers random moments into one pattern. It turns bad defending, bad luck, bad decisions and bad timing into one club-wide personality trait. So the question isn't really, are Spurs cursed? That's too easy and also a bit silly. The better question is darker than that. Can a club talk itself into being doomed? Because Tottenham's most famous insult wasn't invented by their enemies, it was self-harm with a punchline. The odd thing is, Tottenham already had the perfect soil for a word like Spursy. Long before the forum post, long before the memes, the club had built an identity where losing could still mean something. Not just losing, obviously, not wanting to lose, but losing in the right way. Tottenham's motto is audere est facere, to dare is to do. It's there in the club's own language, and the badge, in the self-image, in the way Spurs people talk about what the club is supposed to be. And then there's the line, the big one, the line that follows Tottenham around like a family motto. It is better to fail aiming high than to succeed aiming low. For years that line has been tied to Bill Nicholson, the great manager, the man of the double, the sainted figure of Tottenham history. But sports historian Norman Giller has argued that the words were actually Danny Blanchflower's. Blanchflower was the captain, the thinker, the poet of that team. Nicholson, by most accounts, was blunter than that. And that matters, not because it ruins the quote, but because it shows how Tottenham's identity got made. It wasn't just inherited, it was shaped, polished, attributed, repeated, and turned into scripture. Tottenham's curse works because failure was made to sound beautiful. If you grow up inside that story, just winning starts to feel a bit small. Winning ugly feels like a compromise. Winning by lowering yourself feels almost like losing. So Spurs built this strange emotional trap. The club wants trophies, badly. The fans want trophies. The managers are judged on trophies. But the club also wants the football to feel like Tottenham. Brave, open, attacking, stylish, a little bit reckless. It's not just a style, not just tactics, it's identity. And identity is harder to change than a formation. So when things go wrong, there's already a script waiting. At least they dared, at least they tried, at least there was, somewhere in the wreckage, an echo of glory. That's a beautiful line. It's also a very dangerous one. The funniest and maybe cruelest part of this story is that the golden age wasn't as clean as people remember it. The 1960 to 61 Tottenham team is the Everest, first double of the 20th century, league title and FA Cup. Then, soon after, the first British club to win a European trophy. 8 trophies in 16 years under Nicholson. White Hart Lane singing Glory, Glory, Hallelujah until, in Nicholson's own memory, it felt almost religious. That team is the answer to every modern argument. That team is the proof that Tottenham can be great. That team is the dream everyone keeps measuring against. And even that team had a Spursy moment. In that double season, Tottenham were 4-0 up against Burnley, 4-0, the kind of lead that should be a locked door, and the match finished 4-4. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean the double team were fragile. They weren't. That's the point. They had a winning mindset the modern caricature almost can't imagine. They didn't expect to lose. They were hard, talented, intense, and sometimes more physical than the polite myth likes to admit. But the 4-4 matters because it shows how memory works. Spursy isn't proof Spurs were always weak. It's proof every myth edits the past. When Tottenham win, the past becomes glory. When Tottenham collapse, the past becomes evidence. And once the word Spursy exists, it can reach backward. It can grab Burnley in 1960. It can grab every late goal, every blown lead, every strange little disaster and say, see, it was always there. That's not history in the clean sense. That's folklore. A real historian has to separate causes. A fan doesn't have to. A fan can just feel the pattern. And football is built on feeling the pattern. So the double side becomes two things at once. The proof Tottenham aren't doomed, and the proof that even at their highest point, the wobble was waiting somewhere in the walls. Even the perfect team left a crack. By 2013, when Spurs fans start using Spursy about themselves, the club doesn't need a full explanation anymore. The word does the explaining. It means promise. It means danger. It means you've seen this movie before, even if the actors are different. And that's what makes it so efficient. One word can carry decades of bruises. There are surrendered leads. There are showpieces that slip away. There are seasons where Tottenham climb high enough for the view to hurt. And there is always Arsenal, standing nearby. Because in North London, failure doesn't happen in private. Arsenal fans even turned Tottenham's finishing below them into a calendar event, St Totteringham's Day, a little annual ceremony of superiority. For Spurs fans, it wasn't just that Arsenal won more, it was that Arsenal had language too. They had a holiday for Tottenham pain. Then came 2015-16, one of the cleanest modern examples of how the word feeds itself. The Premier League table shows Tottenham finishing third. That sounds good, until you remember the emotional shape of it. Spurs had been chasing Leicester. They were 8 points clear of Arsenal with 4 games left. They had a real chance to finish above them, to break the old shadow, to make the season feel like a turning point. And then they finished behind Leicester and behind Arsenal. Third place became a punchline. Once a club has a word for collapse, every wobble starts to look like evidence. This is where Spursy becomes more than banter. It becomes a filter. If Tottenham lose early, it's just bad. If Tottenham lose late, it's destiny. If Tottenham are terrible, it's normal football misery. If Tottenham are good and still fall short, it's Spursy. And that distinction is important, because the word doesn't really describe failure, it describes hope being punished. The Maurizio Pochettino years are the hardest part of the Spursy story, because for a while, the joke looked old. Tottenham were young, fast, intense and scary. They had Harry Kane scoring like a machine. They had a team that felt built rather than bought. They had a new kind of belief, and for a brief period, they even flipped the Arsenal shadow. It felt like the club had found a way to be modern without losing the old idea of itself. This is the cruelest version of Tottenham, not the hopeless version, the almost version. Because when a team is bad, you can protect yourself, you can laugh, you can detach. But when a team is good, really good, you start making room in your head for the impossible, and Tottenham gave their fans plenty of room. The 2019 UEFA Champions League final match report is a real document you can put on screen. Tottenham Hotspur against Liverpool in Madrid, the biggest club match in Europe. Spurs had never been there before in the Champions League era. It was the kind of night that could have split the history into before and after, but Liverpool won. Tottenham didn't get destroyed. It wasn't some comic humiliation. In a way, that made it worse. They were close enough to touch the door, and still it didn't open. The cruelest Spursy season isn't the hopeless one, it's the one that nearly works. And around that same modern era, there's another pattern that feeds the feeling. Tottenham develop or polish brilliant players, and then watch them win elsewhere. Gareth Bale leaves and wins Champions Leagues at Real Madrid. Luka Modric leaves and becomes one of the defining midfielders of his generation. Dimitar Berbatov goes. Eventually Harry Kane, the record scorer, leaves for Bayern Munich, still chasing the trophies he couldn't get at Spurs. Each case has its own reasons: money, timing, ambition, contracts, the food chain of football. It's not magic, but in the fan mind, it becomes one story. Tottenham don't just miss the trophy, sometimes the trophy leaves wearing someone else's shirt. A curse gets stronger when it has accidents to feed on, and Tottenham have accidents, real ones, strange ones, the kind that sound too on the nose if you wrote them in a bad film. John White, one of the great players of the double era, died after being struck by lightning. Terry Medwin, another player from that world, had his career ended by injury. These aren't punchlines, they're tragedies. But tragedies become part of club memory, and club memory doesn't keep everything in neat boxes. Then there's Lasagnagate. In 2006, Tottenham went into the final day chasing a Champions League place. A group of players became ill before the decisive game against West Ham. The story became tied to a pre-match meal, to hotel food, to the idea that even dinner could conspire against Spurs. Arsenal took the Champions League place. Again, you can explain it in normal terms. Illness happens. Games still have to be played. Football is messy. But to fans, this is how fatalism gets built. Not from one giant event, but from stories of bad timing, stories of weird timing, stories of the universe having a sense of humour and aiming it straight at Tottenham. A curse doesn't need to be real if it keeps getting fed real accidents. And this is where Spursy becomes darkly useful. It turns chaos into order. It gives pain a filing system. Lightning, illness, late goals, lost finals, players leaving, Arsenal laughing. Put them all in the same drawer, stamp the same word on the front. That's comforting in a strange way, because if you're cursed, at least you're not just incompetent. If you're cursed, the suffering has shape. If you're cursed, the next disaster isn't random, it's part of something bigger. That's the trap. A curse can feel better than chance. Then Tottenham did the most Tottenham thing possible. They won a trophy, and somehow made it feel like another identity crisis. The 2024-25 season should have broken the spell. Spurs won the Europa League, their first trophy in 17 years. The UEFA Europa League final is the document, the medal is real, the drought ended. But the way it happened didn't fit the story the club likes to tell about itself. Under Ange Postecoglou, Tottenham had been sold a version of brave front foot football, Ange ball, with risk, width, attacking intent, all the stuff that sounds very Tottenham when it's working. But in the Europa League final, Spurs won by going pragmatic. By most accounts, they moved away from the open attacking idea and protected the game with a defensive low block. In other words, Tottenham won by doing the thing Tottenham mythology is always a bit suspicious of. And then there's the league table. The Premier League's 2024-25 table shows Tottenham finishing 17th. 17th, one place above the drop. So in the same season, Spurs were European trophy winners and almost a relegation team. That number is so absurd it almost feels designed by the curse itself. Tottenham finally escaped Spursy by becoming a team Spurs barely recognised. And then, 16 days after winning the trophy, Postecoglou was sacked. You can argue the football had broken. You can argue the league season was too bad to ignore. You can argue a club of Tottenham's size can't finish 17th and just shrug because there's a cup in the cabinet. All of that can be true, but emotionally it lands in the old place. Spurs win and the aftertaste is confusion. Spurs end the drought and the next scene is a manager leaving. Spurs get the thing they wanted and somehow it still doesn't settle the argument. Even the cure looked cursed. So, can a club talk itself into being doomed? Not literally. A word doesn't miss a header, a meme doesn't lose a runner at the back post, a forearm joke doesn't make a midfielder panic in stoppage time. But language does matter. It tells you what to notice, it tells you what to fear, it tells you how to file the next bad thing when it happens. And Spursy is powerful because it's not only an insult, it's a way of reading Tottenham. It turns the club into a repeating story, where every season is waiting for the same twist. That doesn't mean the players believe it in some simple way. Modern footballers are professionals, coaches prepare, analysts work, clubs spend millions trying to remove superstition from performance. But football clubs aren't just teams, they're crowds, memories, songs, jokes, grudges, old quotes, old tables, old wounds. They're the stuff people bring with them into the stadium before a ball is kicked, and if enough people expect the room to collapse, the room starts to feel unstable. Spursy is not a curse placed on Tottenham, it's a story Tottenham learned to tell before anyone else could. That's why the word has lasted, because it explains too much too quickly. It makes the pain funny enough to share. It makes the fear communal. It turns private dread into club culture. And that's also why it's so hard to kill. A trophy can end a drought. It can't automatically end a story. A new stadium can change the skyline. It can't automatically change the thing fans whisper at 2-0. A new manager can change the shape of the team, he can't instantly change the shape of the memory. Tottenham may not be doomed, but Spursy means they'll always have to beat the opponent, beat the scoreboard, beat the clock, and then beat the word their own fans invented. The curse isn't that Tottenham always fail, it's that even when they don't, everyone waits to see how they will.